Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to do an episode of Will It Fail for Terminator Dark Fate, which is set to hit theaters on November 1st of this year. Now, before I go into this, let's just go a little bit into the lead up to Dark Fate before I break down the cast and the director and the budget and stuff like that, like I normally do, because the movies that came before this film I think are going to very greatly affect it, and most likely in not a very good way. And we can go back to Terminator really after Terminator 2. So we have Terminator T3 or Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, which is not a very good movie, although I believe it did make a profit. Then you go to Terminator Salvation, a movie which came out and again pretty much made its money back. Then we go into Terminator Genisys. Now, Terminator Genisys was supposed to be a soft reboot for the franchise. They were going to redo the timeline. They were going to mess with a bunch of stuff. They were going to reintroduce Sarah Connor with a younger actress, namely Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones, and Kyle Reese actor Michael Biehn being replaced by Jai Courtney. So that was their original plan. That movie failed miserably. It did, however, make its money back. It had a $155 million budget. It made $440 million on the worldwide box office. So that movie technically did make a profit, although they were looking for something much, much bigger. Now, going from that, we move into Terminator Dark Fate, which is supposed to be the true successor to Terminator 2, and supposedly had a large portion of it had James Cameron's fingerprints all over it. Now, let's go down to the director. Now, the director of this film is Tim Miller, and most people will know him from the first Deadpool film. He's very good at directing action, which is what you need for a Terminator-type movie. I'm not sure exactly how he's going to be at directing very serious stuff, because, again, he seems to make his home or have a very good understanding of comedy, but who knows? This movie might be somewhat comedic as well. But he's a competent director. I'm not going to say he's an incompetent director. He's not. They didn't just hire some schlub off the street. They hired somebody who knew how to direct a film and knows how to direct action. So I have to give them points for that. James Cameron, I think, would have been a better choice, but obviously he was off working on Alita Battle Angel, and he's still working on the Avatar sequels, although he is an executive producer on the film. Now, there is a little side note to that apparently, according to some people, James Cameron never actually stepped on the set of Terminator Dark Fate. And that's extremely surprising given the fact that he was executive producer, even though Tim Miller does know his way around directing. And James Cameron basically said that he doesn't think he needs to shadow a director who knows what he's doing. So I get that, but for him not to show up at all, or at least supposedly not show up at all, I think that shows how much commitment he had to this project, which is not a terrible amount, because I think he had more dumped into Alita, since that was a passion project of his, and I think he has more dumped into the Avatar films because he's making fucking 4 of them. Back to back to back to back to back. So the stuff about James Cameron's coming back with the true sequel to T2. I know he was involved with the story writing process and stuff like that as well, but again, I don't take his involvement as seriously with this as I did with something like Alita, or I did with something like the Avatar films, because it seems like he was a very, very, very indirectly involved in this. So I do take a little bit off for that, because that's something that's really been touted in various advertising and articles and stuff that are written about it, and it's kind of disingenuous, so I'm going to take a little bit off for that. Now we go down to the cast. So let's start off with some of the new faces. So we have mainly Natalia Reyes, who is playing Danny Ramos. And she's kind of the new John Connor type character that they've introduced. Now, there were some leaks that were put out a while back about, how in the beginning of the movie John Connor was supposed to die, and she's kind of supposed to be the next, person they have to save, quote unquote, in order to stop, Judgment Day and stuff. But since that time, there have been reshoots done, and Eddie Furlong has been added back to the cast as John Connor. So that's extremely interesting from the point of view that, uh, you know, now you're either changing that or you're warping around with time travel. There's a lot of questions there. Um, but I don't think Natalia Reyes is necessarily bad for that type of a role. She's surrounded by a lot of veteran actors. So I don't really have any worries about that. Then we also have Gabriel Luna, who is playing the new version of the Terminator, which is the one we see in all the trailers. The one that has the black skeletal body and then like the T-1000 outer layer that can separate and stuff. So he looked really good in that. He had kind of it felt like he was kind of trying to channel Robert Patrick from Terminator 2, and it felt like he did it in a relatively convincing way. I don't really have too many worries about him. He seems like he can get it down pretty good. Now the last one is Mackenzie Davis. Now Mackenzie Davis plays a character called Grace, and apparently Grace is actually a human with cybernetics that have been put into her body. So she's not actually a Terminator. Um, but I will say this is that I understand that she probably had to work out very heavily for the role and do a bunch of other stuff, but she looks like a fucking dude. I'm sorry, but I honestly thought that was a guy when I first saw the screenshot for the movie. The first screenshot that came out with Natalie Reyes, Linda Hamilton, and her. I actually thought that was a guy in the middle. I was really confused when I found out it was a woman, and I was even more confused when I found out it was the same woman that was in *Halt and Catch Fire*, which was a show on I believe it was AMC, and she was actually pretty attractive in that show. Now it also could just be the makeup and the way that like the CGI and stuff is, or anything like that, or maybe that it's because she has all the cybernetics and stuff in her, so maybe that changed her physical aspects a bit, and they've changed some of that stuff in post. But I feel like you didn't have to go like full She-Man on that. Even though I don't really take points off for it, it's just an aesthetically weird thing to me. But now let's go into that's the new cast. The new cast seems like they're relatively okay. Now let's go into the old cast. Now the old cast, you have your classics coming back. Obviously, you have Linda Hamilton coming back as Sarah Connor, which is a huge plus. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger returning as the Terminator yet again, which is a huge plus. You have Eddie Furlong coming back as John Connor, which is a huge surprise. I believe they announced that at Comic-Con this past year. And they went into a round of reshoots so that they can put him in the film, even though it is still slated for a November 1st release. So all three of those original characters coming back is a huge, huge plus to this movie, where that's kind of the one thing that those movies after T2 were missing, and that was you didn't have Sarah Connor, and you didn't really have. You had John Connor in most of those movies, at least Salvation and T3, but nobody did as good a job as Eddie Furlong did in T2 with that character when he was a kid. So I'm hoping that maybe he can cull back up his acting talent. Obviously he's fallen off quite a bit since then, and give us a good performance again as an older version of John Connor. And I'm actually kind of glad that they got Eddie Furlong back to do this, because it does show some continuity in the timeline, and it helps you from a point of view of somebody who's watched the films. It helps you kind of jump over those middle three films to Terminator Dark Fate and kind of think like, okay, there's continuity here as opposed to those other three movies that came out. Now, I don't take anything off of the cast. I think the cast is very good. They have had a bit of PR problems. Tim Miller had that thing where he said he's going to scare misogynists men and stuff like that. I think he's just being an edgy boy. I don't think that really has too much to do with it. But then we go into some of the other stuff involving this. So before we skip down to the budget, let's go over some of the stuff that we've seen in the trailers. Now, the trailers have been largely showcasing some of the action sequences, specifically one that involves the Terminator chasing after Grace and Mackenzie Davis and Natalia Reyes on in a car they're in a car and he's chasing after them in a truck, and then they cause the truck to crash, and then he is shot by Sarah Connor and presumably blown up with a grenade and a bunch of other stuff. If we can piece some of the stuff in the trailers together, that's been the main action piece. We've seen a few other little scenes, like when they meet the Terminator at the Arnold Terminator at his like little cabin in the woods that exists for some reason. Again, we're not really given an explanation at this point why Arnold is in the film, because he was melted down at the end of T2. I think there may have been something in the leak spoilers, but that might have changed again with reshoots. So moving forward from that, we've gotten little glimpses of like where the plot goes, but not anything solid, which is what you want in trailers. You don't want to give away the whole plot. If you give away the whole plot in a trailer, like what Terminator Genisys did, where they gave away that John Connor was turned into a Terminator in the second trailer, you just ruined the movie. That was a huge plot twist in that film. I don't know why you put that in the trailers. That made absolutely no sense to me. That was almost as bad as displaying Doomsday in the second trailer for Batman v Superman. And that's a lot of the cardinal sins of second trailers. Like, the first trailer is really good. It gave away just enough. Then the second trailer fucked it up. It gave away too much. I don't think either one of these trailers necessarily gave away too much about the plot to Terminator Dark Fate. Again, we still haven't seen anything with Eddie Furlong in the trailers, although I'm sure if they have a third one that comes out before the November 1st release date, we will actually see that. But from what I can see in the trailers, the action looks pretty good. Again, it's Tim Miller. I have a bit of a trust with him because of the first Deadpool film. So the action looks good. Linda Hamilton seems like she stepped back into the role of Sarah Connor very well. It seems like Arnold Schwarzenegger is still down for doing all the action stuff. It's really good. And like I said, the only question mark I really have right now is Eddie Furlong, to see how he's going to come back to that character and how he's going to adapt after being away from that character for what now is almost 30 years. So, like I said, no problems with the cast. Trailers were pretty good. Director is trustworthy. Now we move down to the budget. And like I said before, the budget is reflective of how... The budget for this film is supposedly larger than the budget they used for Terminator Genisys. Now, as I said before, Terminator Genisys was $155 million. This budget is estimated from $160 to $200 million, according to Google. I am going to go for the top estimate, which is $200, because that if it makes whatever the high estimate for the budget is, if it makes its money back on that, then it made its money back no matter what. So, $200 million. That would mean roughly it would probably have to make somewhere in the realm of $450 to $500 million to break even, which means it would have to make more money than Terminator Genisys did at the box office. Now, the only question that I kind of have for this movie is, first and foremost, did Terminator Genisys sour people on the franchise and the lukewarm entries before that? Did T3 and Salvation and Genisys, did they sour everybody on this thing? And when you have a sequel, the movies that came before it, in many, many cases, can cause people to stay away from that sequel, even if it's a good movie, because the previous films in the series sucked. You can see that with Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible 2 was a crap film. A lot of people hated it. And then Mission Impossible 3 comes out. People really liked it, but it had a lower box office because everybody thought that Mission Impossible 2 was such a piece of shit. So I think that's something that can definitely hurt this film. And the other thing is, we haven't seen a Terminator movie make a lot of money, I think, probably since T2. But that's just something that you have to look at. And I honestly don't necessarily know if this film is going to make more because of all that souring beforehand, but because they've done a relatively good job with the advertising, the PR is kind of shaky, but I think they can break even on that. And because they got all those old faces to come back, and because they have because they have experienced people doing this movie, I'm going to say this movie is probably going to succeed. I think you're going to probably see something in the between $700 and $800 million for this film. in the worldwide box office. It is rated R. That is something to also note, where it's the first Terminator film since T3 to be rated R. Salvation and Genesis were both rated PG-13, and the original two films obviously were both rated R. So there's a lot on the table, but I ultimately think this movie is probably going to succeed. And the other thing is, it's not really, there's not too many other films that are going to be coming out around that same time that I think are going to draw the same amount of audience. So it's just something to think about. But I ultimately think this will succeed. I think it's going to make between 7 and 800 million. And the only thing I hope is that this doesn't cause endless sequels in the Terminator franchise. But in saying that, thank you for listening. Hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?